I was raised in a small town in West Virginia. I won't mention the name of my college, but it was a tiny university located about 15 minutes away from my hometown. I started my freshman year in 2021, and COVID was still affecting everything about college life. One of the biggest changes was in the dormitories. Most students avoided staying on campus because of COVID. They chose to rent apartments nearby instead, but I couldn't afford that luxury. So I stayed in the dorms and drove home every weekend since I lived so close. Despite everything, I still wanted that traditional college dorm experience. On my very first day, I met the girl I'd be sharing a room with. We had already exchanged a few messages because the university gave her my phone number, so we could introduce ourselves beforehand. I found that a bit odd. She texted me first and seemed friendly enough. When I finally met her face to face, she was still pleasant, but very quiet. There was something about her that felt entitled. During one of our conversations, she mentioned that most students had private rooms because enrollment was so low. She said she had her own room last semester until I showed up. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I quickly changed the subject. I told her that I lived nearby and would be leaving every Friday and returning Monday mornings around 6. She barely reacted. Most weekdays, she spent her time at her boyfriend's dorm anyway. Now here's where things got disturbing. That first Friday, I packed my things and headed home for the weekend. I returned Monday morning at exactly 6, just as I had told her. My first class wasn't until 10, so I decided to get some more sleep. I had this thick memory foam mattress, and after lying there for about 10 minutes, I felt the edge of my bed sink down. I didn't move. I lay completely still, too exhausted to fully understand what was happening. Then the pressure released, and the mattress lifted back up. That's when I realized someone had been leaning against my bed. I slowly turned around and saw her lying on her bed, facing the wall, apparently asleep. I convinced myself it was nothing and went back to sleep. The following weekend, the same routine. I left Friday, came back Monday at 6, and tried to rest. But moments after I lay down, I felt the mattress sink again. This time it wasn't just the edge. The entire side of the bed sagged like someone was sitting right next to me. I froze completely. Then I heard movement and felt them stand up. My bed was unusually high. I actually needed a step stool to get onto it, and I clearly heard someone jump down from it. I held my breath, then slowly looked over. She was lying in her bed again, facing the wall. I was confused. Was I imagining things? Was this some kind of sleep paralysis? No, that couldn't be it because I could still move. Maybe someone broke into our room? Impossible. Only the two of us had keys. I decided I was just overtired and drifted back to sleep. The next Monday, I was genuinely scared to go back. When I walked in, I saw her lying in bed, this time facing toward my side. She appeared to be sleeping. So I quietly climbed into my bed and tried to rest. About 5 minutes later, I felt my mattress sink once more. I kept my eyes squeezed shut. I felt someone sit down beside me. I prepared myself to turn around, and then I felt a hand wrap around the back of my neck. My heart nearly stopped. I thought I might faint. I didn't move a single muscle. The hand didn't squeeze. It just rested there, holding my neck. After what felt like an eternity, I finally felt him get off my bed. I remained frozen for several more moments, terrified. Then I slowly turned around. She was facing the wall again, seemingly asleep. But I didn't care anymore. I jumped out of bed, left the room immediately, and called my mother. I skipped all my classes that day. I told my mom everything that had been happening, and she reported it to the university. They allowed me to switch rooms, which was a huge relief. They asked if I wanted to get the police involved, but I declined. There was no concrete evidence that she had actually done anything. I simply requested that they never assign her another roommate. After settling into my new room, I started remembering certain things. She had once mentioned having a previous roommate who left very quickly, but she never explained why. I also recalled seeing her open a locked drawer filled with around 10 bottles of prescription medication. She claimed it was for some kind of skin condition, but I started wondering if that was actually true. Perhaps she had some other issue. Maybe the medications had strange side effects. A few days later, I realized I had forgotten a book and a binder in her room. I didn't really care about the book, but she sent me a message asking me to come pick up my stuff. I told her I was busy adjusting to my new room, but eventually agreed to get my things just to avoid raising any suspicion. My old key still worked, so I let myself in. She wasn't there, and I exhaled in relief. I grabbed my belongings and turned toward the door, but when I turned around, she was standing right there in the doorway. I hadn't heard her come in at all. I forced a smile and tried to act normal. She just stared at me silently. I walked past her to leave, and then she spoke. "Where's your new room?" I told her it was on the first floor. She asked which hallway. I lied. She kept pushing, asking if it was near the stairs, the main entrance, the office. I said I couldn't remember. She didn't stop asking. I lied again and said it was near the stairwell. Then I turned and walked away. I never saw her again after that. I considered warning her boyfriend about her behavior, but I was too frightened. Even now, I still wonder about what happened. Was I dreaming? Hallucinating? I don't believe so. And it couldn't have been anyone else, because only we had access to that room. Maybe she was sleepwalking due to her medication, or maybe she had darker intentions. My mother believes she was testing how close she could get to me without waking me up. And that final morning, she might have actually been trying to strangle me. I'll never know for sure. It's all behind me now, but I truly hope she was never given another roommate. This happened while I was studying at university. I attended the University of Huddersfield from 2021 to 2023. The town isn't exactly famous for its nightlife, so many students end up spending late hours on campus, usually in the library or in academic buildings that remain open around the clock. I was never someone who stayed out late, but during my final year, I had no other option. I was enrolled in an advanced statistics course, and the professor was known for assigning enormous workloads. One of the biggest projects was due soon, and I hadn't made nearly enough progress. My laptop was malfunctioning, so I decided to use the computers in the business building instead. The business building sits somewhat apart from the rest of campus. It's a 3-story structure, fairly old, and there's always this strange, sterile quietness about it, especially after dark. But the computer lab on the second floor was usually deserted after 9 at night, so I figured it would be ideal for focusing. I arrived around 10 that evening. The campus was already silent. The moment I stepped inside, I noticed how much colder it was compared to outside. I swiped my student ID, heard the beep, and the door clicked open. The entire building reeked of cleaning chemicals, which told me the janitorial staff had already finished their rounds. I headed straight for the computer lab, turned on a machine, and began working. For a while, everything was fine. The soft hum of the computer and the clicking of my keyboard were the only sounds. I kept checking the clock, reminding myself to leave before 1 in the morning. But around 11:30, something strange occurred. I was reviewing some data when I heard a door slam somewhere down the corridor. It wasn't the main entrance. The sound came from deeper inside the building. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe it was the ventilation system or a janitor. But then I remembered the cleaning crew had already left long ago. I tried to ignore it and continued working. But then I heard footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps echoing through the hallway outside the lab. They weren't hurried, and they weren't faint. Whoever it was seemed to be walking deliberately, as if they wanted to be noticed. I sat frozen in my chair, staring at my screen, hoping they would just walk past. But instead, the footsteps stopped directly outside the lab door. There was a small window in the door, and I could have looked through it if I leaned back. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. I just sat there, holding my breath. After about 10 seconds, I heard the door handle rattle. It wasn't someone casually checking if it was open. It felt intentional, like someone was trying to frighten me. Whoever was out there seemed to want in, but couldn't get through. My heart started racing. The lab doors locked automatically after a certain hour, so I knew they couldn't just walk in. But the persistent rattling made me feel sick. After roughly 30 seconds, the rattling stopped. The footsteps resumed, slowly moving away down the hall until they faded into silence. I sat there debating whether to pack up and leave. But my project was due the next morning, and part of me rationalized that it was probably just another student playing a prank. I tried to convince myself of that and went back to typing. But less than 10 minutes later, I heard it again. Footsteps. Only this time, they weren't coming from the hallway. They were coming from above me. That building has those thin ceiling panels, and sometimes you can hear the pipes when the heating system activates. But this wasn't pipes. This was unmistakably the sound of someone crawling or dragging themselves across the tiles directly overhead. I looked up, terrified of what I might see. One of the ceiling panels shifted slightly, just enough to show that weight was pressing down on it. Then came a slow creak, like someone carefully lowering themselves, trying not to make noise. That was enough for me. I ripped out my flash drive, stuffed my notebook into my bag, and sprinted toward the door. The second I entered the hallway, it felt like stepping into a different dimension. The corridor was dimly lit by flickering fluorescent lights, and the only sound was my sneakers squeaking against the floor tiles. I walked quickly, fighting the urge to break into a full run. I reached the stairwell, threw open the door, and started descending. That's when I made the mistake of looking up. One floor above me, standing on the landing, was a man. He wasn't a student. He wasn't a professor. He looked completely out of place. His clothes were baggy and torn. Half his face was hidden in shadow, but I could see his mouth hanging open in what looked like an impossibly wide grin. He wasn't moving. He just stood there, staring down at me. I ran. I flew down those stairs, so fast I nearly tripped. I crashed through the ground floor door and sprinted for the main entrance. My ID card barely registered in time to unlock it, but the moment it clicked, I shoved the door open and ran across campus without looking back. I didn't stop until I was inside my dorm with the door locked behind me, my back pressed against it, gasping for air. The next morning, I returned to the building only because I had to submit my project. In the daylight, the place felt completely different. But then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. One of the ceiling tiles was missing, the one directly above where I had been sitting. And another tile from the corner was gone too, the same one I had seen moving the night before. It looked like someone had been watching me work from above. When they couldn't get through the locked door, they must have climbed back into the ceiling to find another way in. I shudder to think what would have happened if he had entered the lab before I ran. Needless to say, I bought a new laptop after that. From then on, I completed all my assignments from the safety of my own dorm room. My name is Annabelle. I'm 20 years old and from the UK. This incident took place when I was in high school, which is what we call college here in Britain. I was 16 at the time. What I'm about to share is the most terrifying day of my entire life. I know that sounds dramatic, but you'll understand why. Let me give you some context. My school required everyone to wear lanyards with ID cards attached. Anyone could walk into the main building, but to get past the lobby, you had to scan your ID on a screen to unlock the inner doors. The cards displayed your photo and name, but a lot of students would flip them around so the picture wasn't visible. You also needed the ID to open almost every door in the building except for classroom doors. This was a relatively new school. It was small in terms of student population, but housed in a large building. 1/3 of the building was a special education facility for students with learning disabilities. Another third was a nursery, and the remaining third was the actual high school. I had just started attending this school, and I clearly remember being told on the first day never to let anyone inside that we didn't recognize. The day this happened was during my second week, but technically, it was only my second full day because I had been sick most of that week. I had geography class scheduled for the entire day. This incident occurred about halfway through, roughly 20 minutes after lunch had ended. During lunch, I had drunk a huge amount of juice from the cafeteria because I had to finish it before break ended. We weren't allowed to bring drinks into class, and I had nowhere to store it without it spilling. So 20 minutes later, I desperately needed to use the bathroom. I asked my teacher for permission. Normally, we weren't allowed to leave during class, so he was annoyed since we had just had a break. But he could see I really needed to go, so he reluctantly let me. This detail matters because at that time, almost no one would be walking around the school. Even teachers rarely roamed the halls during class hours. I left the classroom and walked through a set of double doors into the cafeteria. It was completely empty. I continued through another large room with more classrooms, used the bathroom, and then headed back through the cafeteria toward my class. But when I re-entered the cafeteria, there was a man sitting at one of the tables. It wasn't unusual for someone to be there. Like I said, people occasionally walked around during class time. I was doing exactly that myself. I didn't recognize him. He looked too old to be a student, so I assumed he was either a teacher or perhaps a parent. I kept walking. Then he said, "Hey." I let out a startled yelp because I'm naturally nervous and jumpy. I hadn't expected him to speak to me. I felt embarrassed, but he laughed and said, "Sorry, didn't mean to frighten you." That's when I noticed he was wearing a lanyard, so I assumed he must be a teacher. Looking back now, I realized something important. Although he had a lanyard with an ID card, the card was flipped over so that the side with his photo and name faced inward, hidden against the holder. Students did this all the time. The scanner still worked that way, so it wasn't a problem. But it was definitely strange for a teacher to do that. At the time, though, I didn't think much of it. "I need help carrying some work materials for my car," he said. "Would you mind coming outside with me for just a moment?" Without hesitation, I replied, "Yeah, of course." Because I still believed he was a teacher. We walked out of the cafeteria in silence, through the lobby, and out of the building. I started noticing that he seemed nervous. Teachers usually make casual conversation when walking somewhere with a student, but he said nothing. He also kept fidgeting with his hands, putting them in his pockets, then taking them out and clasping them together. I'm quite shy and awkward in social situations myself, so I didn't attempt any small talk either. The front of the school had about 50 meters of open space before the parking lot, which was hidden behind some bushes until you were right next to it. If you walked straight past the lot without turning, you'd be off school property entirely. We were walking toward the parking lot in silence when he suddenly said, "My work stuff is in the boot." That's what we call the trunk in the UK. He continued, "I've got a few bags, so I just need you to help carry a couple inside." I said, "Yeah, that's fine." We reached the parking lot, and he pointed toward the far end. "My car is the blue one over there." As we got closer, I started noticing something strange in the back seat. When we were just a few meters away, I realized there were at least 2 men crouched down inside the car, trying to hide. I froze. Instead of running, my mind went completely blank. I think they noticed that I had spotted them because suddenly the back door flew open. A man scrambled out of the car, and at the same moment, the man pretending to be a teacher grabbed my arm as I tried to turn and run. He was tall and powerfully built. For context, I'm only 5'2" and quite underweight. I have no idea how I managed what happened next. Maybe it was pure adrenaline, but I summoned every ounce of strength in my body, wrenched my arm free from his grip, and started sprinting back toward the school. I could hear multiple heavy footsteps chasing me, but thankfully, they stopped after I had run only a short distance. My school had large glass automatic doors, and you have to wait for them to open. They definitely would have caught me if they had kept pursuing. I think the glass doors made it too risky, since anyone inside might have seen them. Either way, I made it into the lobby and ran straight to the cafe attached to the library. I rushed up to the woman working there and frantically explained what had happened. She calmed me down and escorted me inside to a teacher's office. They called my parents and the police. The parking lot had security cameras, so the men were identified, caught, and charged with attempted kidnapping. It also turned out that the man had gotten into the building using a student's lanyard that some kid had dropped outside the school. That's why he had flipped the ID card around, to hide that the photo wasn't his. I couldn't return to school for several weeks after that. I'm still in therapy processing this experience, but I felt that writing it all down and sharing it might help me heal. To this day, this remains the most frightening thing that has ever happened to me.